Listener-supported St Gabriel Catholic Radio AM 820 brings you Foundations in Faith. Join Msgr Frank Lane as he offers insights into the readings heard at Mass. And now, Foundations in Faith with Msgr Frank Lane.
This is Father Frank Lane, and we're continuing our program, Foundations in Faith. We're following now the gospel readings that the Church uses in the preparatory period of Advent, and they focus a lot on John the Baptist, and we certainly saw John the Baptist in our last glance at from Mark's Gospel, and so we're going to look at what John's Gospel now says about the Baptist. And we're going to find out, or try to find out, or at least reflect upon what all that might mean for us, and how we might incorporate this into our own personal prayer life and our own preparation for the celebration of the Nativity of the Lord, for the celebration of the coming of Jesus. This Gospel from John is from the first chapter of John, and it follows right after those very, very important words in John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and through him all things have been made, and without him nothing that was made. And then a man came sent by God. His name was John. He came as a witness to speak for the light, so that everyone might believe through him. So it goes then from the proclamation of the Word as being God, and that how he came into the world as the light, and then we find that John enters into the picture as a witness to that light, as a witness to that Word. It's a pretty powerful and pretty dramatic introduction to the role of the Baptist, because if now, and he is proclaiming the coming of Jesus, he is proclaiming the coming of the one who is to be sent. And so what he's doing then is he is preparing the way for the people to find that God himself is going to come among them in the flesh. Now imagine the daunting task of this kind of proclamation, this kind of announcement before the incarnation of the Lord. This kind of announcement before the incarnation of the Lord has been recognized, seen, and kind of proclaimed by the believing community. So what John has is a daunting task. The people's expectations were much lower than what happened. If they had anticipated at all the coming of the Messiah, they kind of expected either a new Davidic figure, a new figure like David, or they expected the return of the prophet Elijah. So they were looking for either a great leader or a great prophet. From the Qumran text, we know that there were some who were seeing as the teacher of light, the teacher of righteousness. There was not the anticipation in the very beginning, or in the tradition of Israel, that the God of Israel himself would become flesh and would dwell among them. This was not part of what they were looking for, which is why they had such a great difficulty with many of the things that Jesus said. Things relating to the Eucharist, things relating to his identity, things relating to his power to forgive sin, his power of miracles, and so forth. None of these things were what really they were essentially looking for. They were looking for someone who was going to come, who would in fact then fulfill their expectations, not fulfill. They had no way of understanding the vastness of the charity of God, the love of God, and the care of God for them. That was beyond their capacity to understand, beyond their capacity to grasp. So when they say then, if Jesus would have simply appeared on the scene, then they would have been even less prepared. But John the Baptist, the one coming out of the desert, the one coming out of the process of having mastered the prophecies of Isaiah, the one who had a very clear Old Testament view, a very clear scriptural view of the person who was to come, even he himself did not understand completely who this person was to be. But he knew, first of all, what his mission was. He came as a witness. A witness is a particularly significant and important person in the story of the Old Testament. The witnesses are the ones who determine the very image and nature of truth and of reality. We find, for instance, the terrible story of the terrible witnesses in the story of Susanna. What a disaster. What was going to happen because the witnesses were unreliable? Susanna was going to be put to death. And it took the brilliance of a young Daniel to destroy their testimony, their evidence. But the evidence of the two witnesses was sufficient, even in a community of people who respected and loved Susanna and found it very, very difficult to believe that she would do what these men said she was doing. Yet at the same time, they, as official witnesses, their credibility was accepted, their witness was accepted. So the role of the witness is a powerful witness in the story of truth and reality throughout the whole Hebrew Scriptures. These, therefore, this is why the witness of Peter in the New Testament is so profoundly important. It trumps, the witness of Peter trumps the variety of stories that take place in the Gospels. People who want to interpret the Gospels, well, Mary Magdalene must be an apostle because she was the first one to see Jesus risen from the dead and so forth. Those things, those are interpretations by people who really don't grasp the culture of the Old Testament, who really don't understand what a significant, powerful thing this was. And so it is not Mary Magdalene's sighting of the risen Lord which establishes the fact of his resurrection. It is the official witness of Peter. That's what establishes it. And in a sense, then, what establishes in the beginning is the witness of John. What establishes in the post-resurrection story is the witness of Peter. So the two witnesses, one at the beginning and one at the end of the public life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, are the ones who more or less frame the story of who Jesus is. They are the ones who stand kind of as the bookends of the truth of the role of the Messiah. Here, it says that John came as a witness to speak for the light, so that everyone might believe through him. All right? Now, the gospel says the light is the Word and the Word is God. So he's coming to testify to the presence of the light of God in the midst of the world. John makes it very important, it makes it a great emphasis. He is not the light, but only a witness to speak for the light. So we have to look at that for just a little bit too, because this is something that can happen over and over again, something we all have to be very cautious of, and something that we have to make sure that we are not complicit with. And that is to claim for ourselves, any of us, to claim for ourselves that kind of honor and respect that belongs to God alone. For only to God is this kind of honor fitting. It is not for any human person. That's why we should always be careful of those figures in the religious world who seek to thrust themselves into the spotlight, who seek to be the ones who draw the respect, the adulation of the crowds. When we find someone who's saying, I am going to tell you about Jesus, look at me, when they assume in a way, I think of this often, when they assume in a way the sense of St. Paul, that, learn from me, do what I do, and so forth. That was St. Paul. That was an apostle. That was someone who had been assured by Jesus Christ that he was to announce the good news to the Gentiles. That is someone specifically sent on a mission through the power of the risen Christ himself. From the time of St. Paul, there are very few human beings, men or women, who are such great saints that they are able to proclaim themselves as the norm and the standard of Christian behavior and Christian belief. They always function, as John is functioning in this sense, as a witness to the Christ, and not as the figure of adulation themselves. I think that this has certainly been shown in the history of the Church. Whenever a priest or a member of the hierarchy or a religious man or woman throws themselves into the spotlight as, do what I do, say what I say, be like me, and then you'll believe in Jesus, we know that they are not personally the witnesses to the light. For what does John say? He was not the light, but only a witness to speak for the light. And this is how John appeared as a witness. When the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" he not only declared, but he declared quite openly, "I am not the Christ. I am not the Christ." Well, then they asked, "Are you Elijah?" "I am not," he said. "Are you a prophet?" He answered, "No." So then they said to him, "Who are you?" We must take an answer back to those who sent us. "What have you to say about yourself?" So John said, "I am as Isaiah prophesied, a voice that cries in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord." All right. So John never puts himself forward as the object of their adulation. John instead steps back in what we call in an apophatic sort of way. The only way you're going to know who I am is to know who I am not. I am not the Christ. I am not Elijah. I am not the prophet that you expected. I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. A quote from the prophet Isaiah, that identifies the one who is going to come into the world to point the way toward the one who is to come. The fact is that what John knows or does not know, who is this light? He knows Isaiah well enough to know that there is something in the divinity that is light itself. He knows that. Does he know exactly that this is God now in the flesh who is going to walk among us? I don't know, and I don't think any know. But they do know that who is coming is the fulfillment of the prophecies. What did the prophecies anticipate? Did they anticipate a great leader? Did they anticipate a great prophet? Did they anticipate a great teacher of righteousness, a great teacher of light? They anticipated all of those things. Did they anticipate God himself? That's very hard to say, but that's exactly what happened. So that John stands then in awe. We know that John is later on going to say, I thought you were the light. I thought you were the Messiah. Even from my mother's womb, I leapt for joy at your arrival. And yet now I don't see what I thought was going to happen. I don't see the expectations that I had. So what is happening? And Jesus says, go back and quote to him the prophecies of Isaiah that you see being fulfilled before you. For then he will know that I am the one that he has expected, and I am the one that he has anticipated and been the witness to. The human part of this is very difficult because John, as in a peak moment, in a moment of great expectation, of great excitement about what's going to happen, John could have thrust himself into the spotlight and said, "Behold, I am the prophet," and they would have followed him. And as a matter of fact, even in the early Christian era, part of the reason for John's denial, in John the Baptist's denial in John's Gospel, is because there were groups of followers of the Baptist. There were groups who had only encountered John the Baptist and had become his disciples, so that there was a fracturing of the community that was supposed to be oriented toward the Messiah, that instead fell apart and gathered around the human figure of John the Baptist, the great prophet, rather than the Christ. And they did to John the very thing that John did not want them to do. I am not the Christ, I am not the prophet, I am not Elijah. In other words, I am not the one whom you are to follow. I am the one who is to prepare you to follow the one who is coming into your midst. In the story of our faith, we see those who did not and do not accept the apophatic way, the negative way of John the Baptist of saying, I am not, I am not, I am not, and thrust themselves into the forefront and thrust themselves as the objects of adulation, we know that that usually does not end well. And we know that we have to be very careful when there are charismatic people involved, because they can capture our minds and our imaginations. But we have to understand that they are simply the humble servants of the Lord in the truth of their being, and they are not the one whom we are seeking, and they are not the one who we are to expect. It's part of the occupational hazard of strong personalities to draw people to themselves. The Christian does not do that. The true believer does not do that. The true believer points them toward the one who is to come, who is already here, points them to the presence of the living God in the midst of the world. And that means in many ways points them to the church, points them to the liturgy, points them to the Eucharist, to the body and the blood of the Lord, and to the Scriptures, His Word, and to the tradition of the church, His Word embedded in the believing community. This is what the authentic prophet does. This is what the authentic witness does. This is what John the Baptist did for Jesus. He could have said, great, I have all this power and all this potential to have all these people come around me and praise me and give me all sorts of adulation and all of that kind of thing. But he does not do that, because he's a truthful man, he is a humble man, and he is a saint. And so the result of it is he knows who he is and the truth of himself. And this is the other piece of the prophets who appear among us, or the would-be prophets who appear among us. The ones who know who they are truly, and therefore are humble before God Himself. They are the ones who have the capacity to speak the truth. The ones who are full of themselves, the ones who say, here I am, here I am. Aren't you grateful that I'm here among you? Because now I'm going to undo all of this kind of stuff. We find it, the sad case, for instance, of Father Carapi, and whatever all that was all about, I don't know. But it was something that should have been able to be seen through. But with a powerful personality, it was difficult to see through it. And we have other such people come into the scene. I think of the tremendous difference, for instance, between a Father Carapi and like a Mother Angelica, who was always pointing beyond herself. She used wit, she used wisdom, she used sarcasm, she used a powerful personality, but always pointing to the Eucharist, to the Mass, to Jesus Christ, always to the Church. I think another very dominant and strong personality that was like that was probably Father Benedict Rochelle. We saw that, But we also have seen march across the stage of our church history those who said, hey, look at me. And that is our first clue that there is something not authentic about their witness, because they have violated the paradigm established by John the Baptist as what it means to be an authentic witness to the Christ. And that actually is our job as believing Christians, which is why the Baptist is such a powerful figure for us, because we have to learn from him. This was not just the Baptist job in the desert in the first century. This is your job and my job. How do we powerfully present and lead the way to the Lord while ourselves stepping aside so that we don't become an obstacle to this relationship with Christ? I think this is something all of us really, everybody who is zealous for the faith, has to ask themselves this question, go into this interior part of our being and say to ourselves, how much of this is about me? And how much of this is about Christ? How much of this is about having my way? And how much of this is bending before the presence of the Lord? We do not have to assume positions of great influence and power within the church for Jesus Christ to be present among people. We have to be careful not to get in the way. How many devout Christians stand between the people they want to proclaim the good news to and the God whom those people seek, and how many people have to move through their personalities and with all of its inadequacies and difficulties to get to Jesus Christ himself. That's one of the great things about the Baptist. That's one of the things he teaches us, and that's one of the things he shows us. I can be as zealous and as assertive as I want to be, as long as I do not become the obstacle to faith in the lives of others. If I have personality quirks, if I have emotional quirks, if I have any of those kinds of things that are all about me and my way of doing things and my way of seeing things, and these are the instruments, the inadequate instruments that I use to be forceful about the truth of the gospel, then I have become an obstacle to the faith of the people. This is what John the Baptist did not do. And why, when Jesus said, there is no man born of woman greater than John the Baptist, part of it is this via negativa. Part of it is, I am not, I am not, I am not. That's not easy. That's not easy when you have a platform. That's not easy when you have a pulpit. That's not easy when you have a classroom. When we stop and think of the I think back on the whole idea of catechetics and on RCI, on instructing people. How much of the stuff that comes out is, from the speaker's point of view, me? I think back, for instance, when I was very young and we lived in a rural area and we didn't have regular catechesis or anything. We had some missionary sisters that came through and would teach us kids. They had a very hard time in the world that we lived in imparting to us Christian doctrine, although they used the catechism, and we certainly had to respond to that. But the thing that I most remember, they always would ask, who went to Mass last Sunday? And I remember there was a certain family in the crowd that never went to Mass. And they asked them why. The sisters would say, why? And they said, well, because our shoes were torn, or because we had torn clothes, or they were poor, and they were not able to dress like some of the others in the church dress. And the sisters would always say to them, Jesus doesn't care what you wear. He wants you to be there with him because he loves you. Now, when you're a little kid, when you're 3 or 4 years old, these sisters were showing these children who Jesus was, who the Christ was. They weren't there saying, well, you have to do what I do. They were saying, this is how Jesus feels about you. This is how Jesus loves you. This is what Jesus wants. He wants those people he loves to be near him. What a consoling thing. What a great thing to say. How many people, when they have the opportunity in a group, in a classroom or something, instead are pushing an agenda, pushing an ideology, pushing a personal preference, all this kind of thing. I remember hearing about an adult education thing, a teacher saying, something about, well, I don't believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, blah, blah, blah. And my response to that is, who cares if you don't believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary? Your teacher. The church says that. That's what you teach, because that's the word of the Lord, because that's what Jesus asks you to be there for. What a serious crime that is, to assume to ourselves that which belongs to God alone. And that's the reason that John the Baptist is such a powerful witness, because each of us who have ever done that, and I'm sure most of us have done that from time to time, that each of us who have ever done that stand condemned by our own thoughts and our own words, by the power and the person and the presence of the Baptist. So that this preparation for the coming of the Christ in the world is to get ourselves out of the way of the light, out of the way of the Word that in the beginning was with God and was God, through whom all things were made, to proclaim the truth of Jesus Christ, I don't care how strong a person's personality is, perhaps that's just a greater challenge to do with the Baptists. Instead of saying, I am this, I am this, I am this, saying, I am not, I am not, I am not. But there is one to come after I proclaim to you whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. So let the Baptist be for us in this time of preparation for the second coming of the Lord. Let us look and see in him this powerful example of truth. I don't care how much someone wants to dissent from the teaching of the church. If you do, you do. But when you stand and impose that on others, you grievously sin. Because your job is not to do that, but it is to follow the example of the Baptist and say simply, I am not, I am not, I am not. And so John quotes Isaiah, make straight the way of the Lord. It's not do things my way, or aren't I great? It's make straight the way of the Lord. And who is the Lord? He is the Word, He is the light, He is God Himself.
Foundations in Faith is a production of listener-supported St Gabriel Catholic Radio AM 820. Archives of Foundations in Faith are available at stgabrielradio.com.